The war on cash. When was the last time you paid for something in cash? If your answer is, I don't remember, you're not alone. And that precisely is what some governments and banks have been working toward for years. Sweden, Denmark, China, India. More and more countries move toward a world without bills or coins. The official reason was always the same: efficiency, convenience, fighting crime. But there is another reason almost nobody discusses publicly. And in this episode, I'm going to explain it with data, with names, and with a surprising turn that is happening right now in 2026 in the country that went further than any other in this direction. Physical cash has existed for almost 3,000 years. Since humans began using coins in Asia Minor, cash has been the most basic form of economic exchange. Anonymous, instant, and without intermediaries between two people who want to make a deal. In the 21st century, that has changed at a speed few people perceive clearly while it happens. And the change does not come only from technology. It also comes from a deliberate decision by governments, central banks, and financial institutions that have very clear incentives for that change to accelerate. Why does this matter? Because when cash disappears, something we take for granted also disappears: the possibility of making a transaction that nobody else can see, block, or cancel. And as we'll see, the country that went furthest down this road just reversed course, frightened by its own consequences. The idea of eliminating cash is not new, but it gained institutional momentum at an accelerated pace over the last 15 years, pushed by some of the most influential voices in the global financial system. In January of 2016, Deutsche Bank's chief executive, speaking at the World Economic Forum in Davos, openly came out in favor of abolishing cash, predicting its disappearance by 2026, the exact year we are in right now. Norway's largest bank, DNB, publicly called for the country to stop using cash entirely. Bloomberg's editorial board published an article titled "Bring on the Cashless Future." Mario Draghi, while president of the European Central Bank, announced the elimination of 500-euro bills, arguing they facilitated organized crime. Larry Summers, former United States Treasury Secretary and Harvard professor, wrote in the Washington Post that it was time to kill the $100 bill. These are not marginal or conspiratorial voices. They are some of the most influential figures in the global financial system, expressing with total institutional clarity their preference for a world without physical money. What is the technical economic argument behind this position? Kenneth Rogoff, a Harvard economist and one of the best-known defenders of eliminating cash, explains it with unusual honesty. In a cashless society, central banks could apply negative interest rates during recessions much more effectively. Why? Because if all your money is mandatorily in a digital account, you cannot withdraw it in the form of bills to avoid the bank charging you for holding it there. You are forced to keep it within the system, which in theory pushes people to spend or invest rather than save, artificially reactivating the economy during deep crises. If there is one country that serves as the definitive case study on a cashless society, that country is Sweden. And what is happening there in 2026 completely changes the conversation. Sweden was the first European country to issue paper bills back in 1661. And 365 years later, it became the country that went furthest in the opposite direction. It all began in 2012, when a group of 6 major Swedish banks, Danske Bank, Handelsbanken, Länsförsäkringar, Nordea, SEB, and Swedbank, jointly created a mobile payment app called Swish. The success was overwhelming. Today, more than 80% of the Swedish population has an active Swish account, and the app became so omnipresent that to swish became an everyday verb that even teenagers use to pay each other back. The amount of cash in circulation in Sweden has been cut in half since 2007, according to data from Sweden's own central bank, the Riksbank. A uniquely Swedish law prioritizes freedom of contract over any legal obligation to accept cash, meaning each business, including the banks themselves, freely decides whether to accept bills or not. The result? Public transportation stopped accepting cash. Bank teller windows stopped handing out or receiving bills, and signs reading "Kontantfritt," meaning "we don't accept cash," became common in cafes, restaurants, and shops across the country. But in 2024, amid growing concerns about cybersecurity threats, possible power outages, and increasing geopolitical instability in Europe, Swedish officials made an unexpected and radical turn. They launched what was officially called the Cash Inquiry. And in March of 2026, the Swedish government announced legislation that will require supermarkets, pharmacies, and health centers to accept cash again, mandatorily. Why did the country that went furthest in this direction reverse course? For two reasons that deserve detailed explanation. The first is national security. In a scenario of massive cyber attack, prolonged power outage, or military conflict, a very real concern in today's Sweden, neighbor to an increasingly aggressive Russia, a 100% digital payment system would collapse completely, leaving the population with no way to buy food or medicine. Cash, in that extreme scenario, functions as a national security safety net that no digital system can replicate when electricity or internet fails. The second reason is social exclusion, documented with academic rigor by researchers at Lund University. Their studies reveal that the most vulnerable sectors of Swedish society, elderly people without smartphone access, undocumented immigrants who cannot obtain the personal identification number required to open a Swish account, people without bank accounts or credit history, were completely excluded from the everyday economic system. For them, buying milk, paying for the bus, or getting medicine at the pharmacy became, literally, impossible without third-party help. The arguments in favor of eliminating cash sound reasonable, and largely they are. It reduces crimes like money laundering, because that crime is historically linked to the possession of large amounts of bills that escape tax authority oversight. It facilitates the fight against tax evasion, because every digital transaction leaves a verifiable trail, and it improves overall economic system transparency, something international organizations have demanded for decades. During the coronavirus pandemic, contactless payments also proved useful in reducing physical contagion risk, which accelerated the digital transition even further in practically the entire world. But there is an argument that rarely appears explicitly in official speeches, and that deserves as much attention as the previous ones. Control. A Spanish finance expert summarized this debate directly with one phrase: they are trying to eliminate cash from our lives to control us. Her central argument is technical and perfectly verifiable. Every digital transaction is traceable by design. That gives banks and governments a level of visibility into each citizen's personal finances that never existed before in human history. And it raises an uncomfortable question that Sweden's own case ended up answering conclusively. What happens if your account gets blocked, whether by error or administrative decision? With no cash available as an alternative, you can't buy food, you can't pay for transportation, you can't do anything at all until the system decides to unblock you. There is a dimension to this debate that is rarely explained clearly outside academic circles, and that is purely technical. When an economy depends significantly on physical cash, central banks face important practical limits on their monetary policies. They cannot effectively lower interest rates to negative levels because people would simply withdraw their money from the bank and hold it as bills, avoiding the loss of value from negative rates. In a completely cashless society, that technical limitation disappears entirely. The central bank can apply negative rates without any citizen being able to escape the system by withdrawing physical bills. This gives governments a much more powerful monetary policy tool during severe economic recessions, but also considerably greater power over each citizen's individual financial decisions, without exception. There is another crucial technical element that the Swedish case made evident. In bank panic situations, when citizens lose confidence in a bank and everyone tries to withdraw their money simultaneously, cash historically acts as a safety valve that stabilizes the system. With no cash available, that valve disappears completely. Money remains completely trapped within the digital banking system, fully subject to the decisions of financial institutions and state regulators, with no physical alternative to fall back on. The reality in 2026 is considerably more nuanced than what either the most extreme enthusiasts or the most alarmist critics suggested barely a decade ago. No major country eliminated cash entirely, and Sweden's case now demonstrates that even the world's most advanced example is explicitly correcting its course. What is happening in most countries in 2026 is a conscious hybrid model. Cash continues to exist legally, and is being reinforced as a safety net, while its everyday practical use remains reduced, pushed by legal limits on large transactions and by the obvious convenience of digital payments. Sweden's own central bank, the Riksbank, simultaneously proposed limiting cash transactions to a maximum of 10,000 Swedish kroner, approximately 900 euros, precisely to prevent the partial return to cash from opening a backdoor for money laundering. It's a deliberate balance, enough cash available to guarantee inclusion and national security, but with clear limits to avoid backsliding in the fight against financial crime. In Spain, since July of 2021, cash transactions exceeding 1,000 euros are prohibited when one party acts as a business or professional. And surveys show something revealing about citizen sentiment. Almost 90% of Spaniards support keeping cash available as a payment method, and 77% directly describe it as a public good that deserves explicit legal protection. Efficiency has a price, and in the case of the war on cash, that price is measured in financial privacy, in resilience against crises, and in inclusion for the most vulnerable sectors of every society. Sweden's case is the most valuable lesson we have available today. The country that went furthest towards a complete digital world was also the first to discover, practically and not just theoretically, why cash should never disappear entirely. Not out of nostalgia, for national security against blackouts and cyber attacks, and for social justice towards those technology inevitably leaves behind. This is not about rejecting payment digitization. Its advantages are real and considerable, and most people will keep preferring to pay with their phone out of pure convenience. It's about understanding that every society needs to consciously preserve, through legislation, a physical alternative that works when the digital system fails, and that includes those that system, by design, always ends up leaving out.